Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia review. And today we'll be breaking down the latest episode to drop, My Villain Academia, which basically serves to bridge the gap between the Gentle Criminal arc and the Endeavor Agency arc, showing what the villains have been up to. And I won't lie, I was pretty hyped up for this episode. It's been ages since we really got to see much of the villains, with us only really catching glimpses here and there, like when Darby attacked Endeavor or Hawks' clandestine interactions with them as a double agent. So to actually see them again, and to also see some hints they'll be undergoing some much needed character development, is a nice addition to the season. Shigaraki for me so far has not been a very impressive or exciting villain, more like an angsty man-child. So I hope this arc really does its job in addressing this and making him seem like a legitimate threat, as well as less of a whiny little kid. And honestly, I think it was a little bit of a mistake to wait this long for this arc to take place. In the manga, this arc was shown before the Endeavor Agency, and I'm pretty sure the Endeavor Agency arc has scenes in the anime that directly spoil the outcome of this upcoming arc. So, that's nice. I really think they should have either intertwined things, or just had this directly after the joint training and slotted Endeavor's arc after that. That being said though, I would just like to say I have read the manga and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points and details. But for the purpose of these reviews, I really only like to talk about what the anime's presented up to now, and not go back and forth between the manga and the anime. This way, reviews stay a little bit more streamlined and not bogged down with me complaining about things that have been left out, and anime-only fans can watch along and join in too without fear of me ruining their fun and spoiling content for future episodes or seasons. So with that being said, let's jump into the review. We start off the episode where we left off the previous one, with Shigaraki strapped onto some machine getting zapped. And considering the content of the previous episode was talking all about Nomus and how they're created, as well as suggesting their minds aren't always erased, and considering the fact that Shigaraki calls All For One Sensei and is considered his successor, I think it's pretty clear what's happening to him here. They're getting him ready to be the next big bad for Deku to face off with, because honestly, All For One doesn't really need to be Deku's villain. The creator loves Star Wars, so I view this as an Emperor and Vader situation. Luke's true enemy was Vader, and in the end, he wants to save him. Same with Deku and Shigaraki. And it'll be All For One taking up the role of the Emperor, the true villain who ends up dead because he thinks his successor/apprentice is too whipped to do anything about it. And I don't know, I think it just feels right to me. But as I was saying, if Shigaraki is to be a villain who can go toe-to-toe with Deku, he needs to juice up. And him getting somewhat no-mood makes sense for this. It just makes him a bit more realistic and viable as a future villain, especially since Deku's doomed to become too strong for anyone to actually be able to beat one day. So he needs a villain he has history with that's able to fight him on his level. And I think this is just further compounded by a flashback with Kurogiri, discussing how All For One's left behind a power for Shigaraki to use. Whilst in the immediate sense it's clear that he's talking about Gigantomachia, because he appears literally in the very next scene, I think it's also hinting at what the Doctor's doing to him in that earlier scene, giving him the power that's been left behind. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that front though. And speaking of Gigantomachia, he makes his long-awaited return, and immediately attacks the villains and tries to kill Shigaraki, breaking down in tears because he's so depressed that All For One's chosen an apparent weakling as his successor. And I'm actually seeing some Sir Nidai and Deku parallels with this, being forced to fight him to prove himself. It's actually such a cool little contrast they've made here, and in my opinion it really helps to keep hammering home that Shigaraki's going to get All For One's quirk soon. This is like his beach junkyard training sequence. Also, I feel like Shigaraki low-key has an arc that revolves around his supposed future allies trying to kill him. First, he tried to recruit Stain, who spat in his face and threatened to murder him. Then Darby tried to kill him when he was recruited. Then Overhaul killed one of his allies and threatened him hard. And now this guy's going all Hulk smash on him. Is it just his personality? Is he that unlikable? Probably. He is pretty whiny and he looks pretty gross too. Imagine how bad he smells. I can see why nobody actually wants to be friends with him or take orders from him. But it is kind of funny that they're always trying to kill him. Hell, the dude we saw in the Hawks episode where he meets up with the Liberation Army even threatens him later this episode. And that's just another reason why they should have aired this earlier, by the way. We know for a fact they join up together by the end, considering how the meeting with Hawks went down, with that guy being in the room and Toga talking about Shigaraki's grand plan to take down Hero Society, so this kind of kills the suspense a little. Also, side note, the image of a man like Gigantomachia breaking down in tears because he thinks he has to work for a weakling was too funny for me. And then to see him going from a raging beast to a docile toddler just from hearing All For One's voice? Well, let's just say I didn't expect his personality to be quite like that, but it was very glorious. And kind of creepy as well. And And can we also take a moment to appreciate the stallion that is Gigantomachia? The dude is a beast, being potentially one of the only characters who's able to have multiple quirks with no body mods whatsoever. He didn't need to be no mood or anything like that to get these quirks. And then he also tanks one of Darby's flame attacks, just running straight through it like it was nothing. Beast. So yeah, this dude is going to be pretty important later on, I'm going to guess. Good luck to the poor souls that have to fight him. And at this point, the villains get abducted by the doctor that makes the Nomus and works for All For One, using the gross black ooze quirk that lets you teleport. Ugh, just seeing that goo erupt from their mouths was very off-putting. I can only imagine how disgusting that feels. And then they find themselves in the doctor's secret lab surrounded by a bunch of high-end Nomus and test tubes. So obviously this is where Darby gets his Nomu that attacks Endeavor at the end of Season 4. And honestly, I feel like this sequence is also coming too late. I really strongly believe they should have aired this arc in the order it appeared in the manga. This, coupled with the reference to how he's working with Hawks, would have made the setup for the Endeavor Agency arc a lot creepier. I get they wanted it to almost be a detective thing with Endeavor slowly cracking the case alongside the audience, but I just think this whole villain arc would have made more sense as a precursor to those scenes. And also, I guess this confirms that this guy's the guy who diagnosed Deku as being quirkless as a kid. And so this is obviously going to spawn a lot of Dad for One theories, or even theories that Deku had a super good quirk, and so they took it away from him. Now, I'm not saying I believe it, but if I had to pick one, I'd combine them into Dad for One steals his son's quirk because he's inherited a form of All For One for himself, and either he wants no rivals, or he doesn't want to have to fight his son in the future. Although based on how he's portrayed in the show, if this was true, he would have probably intended to have a kid in order to be able to steal a version of his quirk and give it away whilst retaining his own power. Honestly, he would probably have a bunch of kids that didn't end up inheriting his quirk that he just abandoned if this speculation's correct. Now, I'm not saying all of this is factual or even close to the truth, but it could potentially make sense depending on how you view things. I mean, surely there's going to be a plot reason beyond super specific coincidence that this dude of all people was Deku's doctor. Surely. And then we get some long-awaited Shigaraki backstory, with the reveal being that the hands he wears belong to his family, which is gross, truly disturbing, and that he was taken on by All For One, who approaches him at his lowest point and gives him a shoulder to cry on, and much needed affection. And this scene was disturbing, from the music to All For One's creepy-ass voice, to him basically grooming this kid who had nobody else in the world. It makes me feel really bad for him, honestly. Also, hearing him use his real name was refreshing, and God, it just makes it all the worse that he chose this kid specifically to mess with All Might and to take a nice steamy crap all over Nanashimura's legacy. He truly is just the worst person in the world, surely. And the way he manipulates him into hating heroes by snuggling him close as he cries and telling him how nobody ever stopped to help because they assumed a hero would do it? God, this dude's just a next level abuser. Truly deranged. But I love it. And that music, mwah! It really just enhances the mood perfectly. And then to give him his own room and house, only to bring in the corpses of his family and tell him it was his fault they died because of his mutated quirk. And then beyond that, going on to tell him that even if he has lost his memories, he still has feelings, and he'll teach him where to redirect those feelings. Jesus. This really just added a whole new layer to Shigaraki's character, and honestly, it does serve to make him a lot more sympathetic than he was before. Back in the lab, Shigaraki informs the doctor that his goal's no longer just the destruction of hero society for him to rule over from the shadows, but rather to just destroy everything pretty much, using his past trauma as his justification. And I kind of agree with the doctor that this was a needlessly edgy speech to make, but also once again, and I know I keep harping on about this, it lost all impact because we already know this because Hawks heard about it when he was undercover. So it kind of loses its punch and doesn't shock or spook you in the way I think it was intended to. Anyway, the doctor tells him he has even more powers to transfer to him, knew it, and that he needs to force Gigantomachia to submit to earn them. So yeah, this is basically his version of the beach training. He really is just villain Deku, isn't he? And then he and the LOV, apart from Darby, who's being set up to fight Endeavor like we saw at the start of the season and the end of Season 4, get sent back to fight. And I like this. It's nice to tie all that stuff together and give it some proper relevance. And I like that they're really consistent with their timelines. And then we head into a battle montage with the LOV fighting Gigantomachia, with Shigaraki being forced to fight him for 48 hours and 44 minutes continuously, with his henchmen sleeping in shifts, whilst he and Gigantomachia only really get 3 hours to sleep every 2 days. And this goes on for 2 months, and all the while Shigaraki is smiling. Yep, Dark Deku indeed. And I also like that they never outright say he's going to directly receive All For One, but they simply set up heaps of Deku parallels to put in the back of your mind. Also, Shigaraki's a beast. What the hell? When did he become such a badass? And then, after being reminded how crazy Toga is, we see the villains reunite during one of the down periods, with Shigaraki being certain they've gotten closer to being able to beat him. And honestly, you have to respect the work they're putting in to fight this guy, considering most of them have quirks that would be useless at taking him down, and yet they still try to help. At this point, Twice gets a call from Jiren with it being revealed that he's been kidnapped by Redestro and the Liberation Army, and that they're cutting off his fingers and leaving them in the areas the LOV attacked, basically throwing down a challenge to come and fight. Because obviously there can only be one leader to usher in the age of freely using your quirk and the downfall of hero society. And honestly, this whole intro would have been cool if we'd never seen him before, because he would have seemed a lot more frightening and dangerous. But we know this guy's gonna lose, and then he's gonna roll over and join him, so... wasted potential to me. But I think it's actually really big brain from Shigaraki to think about bringing Gigantomachia to lay the smack on the Liberation Army. I guess his 2 months of training have paid off in more than just his physical strength. And I'm also looking forward to the eventual 1v1 with Redestro as well, even if the result's been pretty much spoiled. And the preview showing the showdown has had me pretty hyped as well. And then that brings us to the end of the review. And honestly, on paper, this episode was great, especially the flashback with All For One. But I feel like this arc is out of place. I know I keep saying it, but I feel like it's just so true. But otherwise, I think it was really good and did everything quite well, especially fleshing out the villains a bit more. That being said though, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.